Hey guys, so today is going to be a bit different from what I usually do. I've had the thought for a while for a video where I break down a simple short story. Actually, I have done this in the past before, so it's not too new. However, the twist here is that the short story is actually coming from GPT. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. I am Alex, a professional script and novel editor as well as an author myself, and I do have a bit of a background in being able to dissect writing. Building on that, I thought it would be a very interesting experience as to see what kind of stories an AI would generate and how I might make edits to them. This also might be of some help to any of you who are interested in how a professional would go about assessing the quality and execution of a narrative. So, to lay things out super simply, I basically just went to ChatGPT and wrote the prompt, "Write a story about an immortal who wants to die." Nothing spectacular, right? What you're about to hear is the full story that the AI gave back to me in about 15 seconds. After I'm done reading it, I'll go over some of the strengths and weaknesses that I saw and just kind of generally talk about it, as long as edit it from a professional way that I would edit a client's work. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's listen to a story written by a robot. In the heart of a secluded forest, hidden away from the world, there lived a mysterious figure named Kale. Immortal and burdened with an eternity of existence, Kale had grown weary of the endless cycle of life and death. For centuries, he had watched civilizations rise and fall, seen empires crumble, and witnessed the passing of countless loved ones. The weight of his immortality had become unbearable, and Kale yearned for the one thing that had eluded him: the release of death. Kale's abode was a humble cottage, surrounded by towering trees and a serene river that whispered ancient secrets. He had chosen seclusion to avoid forming new connections, for he had learned that every bond he forged would eventually turn into pain, where the mortal world claimed those he cared for. In the past, Kale had tried various methods to end his immortal existence, but every attempt proved futile, leaving him unscathed while others perished. One day, as the crimson sun set on the horizon, Kale sensed a presence nearby. Curiosity tugged at his heart, for visitors were an uncommon occurrence in his realm. Stepping out into the fading light, he spotted a young woman sitting by the riverbank, her eyes glistening with tears. Intrigued, Kale approached her, careful not to startle the fragile being. "What brings you to this secluded place, young one?" he asked in a voice that carried the weight of his ages. The woman looked up, surprised to see someone so ancient yet full of life. "I seek solace," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "My life feels like an endless struggle. I've lost everyone I loved, and I can't bear the pain anymore." Kale felt a pang of sympathy, recognizing the torment of the mortal experience he knew all too well. He sat down beside her, their ages separated by an abyss, yet they shared the weight of grief. In the brief moments they spoke, Kale learned that her name was Alara, and that she had been battling her inner demons for a long time. As the days passed, an unexpected bond formed between them. Alara's vulnerability and Kale's ancient wisdom created a strange harmony. They found comfort in each other's company, knowing they had experienced the darkest corners of existence. Yet Kale remained cautious, knowing that the closer they grew, the more painful it would be when he outlived her. One evening, under a sky adorned with twinkling stars, Alara approached Kale with an unusual request. "I want to understand the secret of your immortality," she said, determination burning in her eyes. "I want to bear this burden alongside you." Kale hesitated, torn between the desire to protect her from the curse of eternal life and the yearning for a companion in his infinite journey. Eventually, he shared the knowledge he possessed of the immortality bestowed upon him by an ancient being in a forgotten age. Together, they delved into the mysteries of life, death, and the universe. With each passing moment, their bond deepened, and Kale began to see a glimmer of hope. Through Alara, he found a new purpose: to share the vast knowledge he had amassed and to help her find the beauty in life despite its fleeting nature. As the years turned into centuries, Alara's mortal body aged while Kale remained unchanged. In time, she became wise and compassionate, embracing the impermanence of existence with a newfound acceptance. She had come to appreciate the fleeting moments, knowing that they were precious in their brevity. But even with their profound connection, Cale's desire to find an end to his existence never wavered. Alara understood his struggle, but she couldn't bear the thought of losing him, knowing that death would not bring them together again. One day, as they stood by the river that had witnessed their journey together, Cale looked into Alara's eyes and said, "I have cherished every moment with you, but my heart still yearns for release. I long to find the peace and the oblivion of death." Alara held back tears, her voice filled with sorrow. "I will always be by your side no matter what path you choose. But remember, even in death, our connection will endure. We are bound by something greater than life itself." With a heavy heart, Cale bid farewell to the mortal world he had grown to love and embarked on a solitary journey to find the answers he sought. He traversed realms seeking ancient beings and delving into forbidden knowledge, but in the end, the true nature of his immortality remained an enigma. Years passed, and Alara continued to live her mortal life, cherishing the memories of the time she had spent with Cale. Even as his presence faded, she felt his essence lingering, a testament to the bond they had shared. In the end, Cale's search for death may have been in vain, but the love and wisdom he imparted to Alara had left an everlasting mark on her soul. In the tapestry of time, their story remained a testament to the complexity of existence and the enduring power of connection even when faced with the enigma of mortality. So, all in all, that was way better than I thought like a robot would have made. Granted, I never used ChatGPT before, so I didn't really have like an expectation of what would come about, but that was honestly pretty good. So I have some notes to be able to talk about just as a general way of looking over this. Again, as far as like strengths and weaknesses. So the first thing obviously is separating my personal feelings about the subject matter from the actual execution of the story. And this is like the number one thing that an editor needs to do. Because as editors, we are also consumers, right? We read the story alongside everybody else who does. And we have our own preferences for what kind of things we like. And I will tell you all, I'm a sucker for romances. Absolutely love them. They're one of my favorite genres of storytelling. And I think they're also really hard to do, but this is really cute. But in that, I have to recognize that just because I like romances and I enjoy this story does not make it objectively good. I have to put aside what I like as an editor subjectively to try to parse out the objective structural pieces that make up this story. So that's the first consideration that I have. What parts of this story work on a fundamental level versus how I can appreciate it on a narrative level. And so separate from that, what I can do is talk about some of the execution of what's happening in the story. So as you'll probably notice, there's very limited dialogue. And I honestly think even though, yes, this was written by a robot like an AI, it works well for the purposes of what the story is trying to convey. So by definition, dialogue is very temporal in the sense that it locks in on a specific space and point in time. When people speak, it's literally over like seconds. But this story specifically is talking about like the passage of decades, if not centuries, for an immortal being. And it basically comes back down to a writing tool, which I don't necessarily have a name for, but it's when you step back from the characters. The closer you are to any individual character, the more, I'm going to say, plot-oriented and specific the sequences of events come. The more you step back from characters to describe their feelings, the emotions, the environments, that creates a story with more thematic meaning, more poetic meaning. And when you're talking about a story that literally takes place over what could be decades, if not centuries, it is really important to be able to make the story feel as if it's taking place over all that time. If this story was very dialogue heavy, that would have been many different instances of being in like singular moments with the characters. And while that's fine, I don't think it could be a short story. That would be a much longer story. So because this story is so compact, I think the lack of dialogue here actually serves it well. It almost feels like a fable or a tale, right? Being told to you about the experience of these characters. And the fact that these characters exist in kind of like this mythical, magical way, I think lends itself to having that type of theme and tone present very well for the narrative. Not to mention, alongside this, I think that there is a simplicity in the story that lends itself very well to the short form that it is. Short stories don't have to be simple. There's plenty of very complex short stories, and there's plenty of simple, long format stories. The complexity of a story is really kind of like up to the author. But I'm gonna say on like a general level, if you're concerned about writing, the shorter a story is, the more difficult it is to pull off high complexity. This story does not try to do anything complex. It's literally just a story about two characters meeting, basically falling in love, or at least learning how to appreciate the humanity and experience of one another. There's not huge twists and turns, there aren't a ton of characters, there's no ensemble cast. It's just the two characters, it's just Alara and Kale. And even though, again, the simplicity may seem like something innate to the story, there are plenty of authors out there who try to cram a ton of things around a theme or narrative that doesn't necessarily become useful. And you really can, in a sense, make less more when it comes to your short storytelling. Short stories are really powerful when they have themes built up by the sequence of events that are, shown in the narrative itself. And here it's characters established, character meets the other character, characters live together and form a bond, and then characters separate. And that's the whole 4 beats of that story. And I think it works really well. And to touch upon one more thing, I think just as a story about potentially romance, that's how I interpret it, it's just really cute. I think there's something interesting about how there's almost like a look at simply the humanity of the two characters coming together, rather than there being kind of like a self-interested transactional relationship, how you might see in a traditional kind of like sexual interpretation of a romance, right? Like one character physically wants the other, and there's lust and passion, and those stories can definitely work well too. But what is happening here in this story, written by a robot, is that each of the characters, regardless, I think, of the physical interaction that they may or may not want to have with each other, you literally see both of them become invested in each other because of their humanity, because of their experiences, because of what they give to each other on a level that basically speaks to their existence. And I think that's really cool. All in all, I really can't understate this. This is a cool story. And I know that ChatGPT generally works by, I think, taking things that other people have written and kind of like smashing them together. So this is by no means, I think, a unique story. In fact, we've probably seen stories about immortals told in this way before, right? But just the fact that it was made in like 15 seconds, and it was very cute, I think is interesting to me. That being said, it's definitely not perfect. There are points in the story that seem off, or disconnected in ways that kind of like have plot holes. And I really chalk this up to it being done by an AI, right? So there's one section that reads, "One evening under a sky adorned with twinkling stars, Alara approached Kale with an unusual request. I want to understand the secret of your immortality," she said, determination burning in her eyes. "I want to bear this burden alongside you." Kale hesitated, torn between the desire to protect her from the curse of eternal life and the yearning for a companion in his infinite journey. Eventually, he shared the knowledge he possessed of the immortality bestowed upon him by an ancient being in a forgotten age. Together, they delved into the mysteries of life, death, and the universe. With each passing moment, their bond deepened, and Kale began to see a glimmer of hope. Through Alara, he found a new purpose, to share the vast knowledge he had amassed, and to help her find the beauty in life despite its fleeting nature. Right, so that's the section that kind of like dictates in details. Alara came to Kale looking basically to share in his immortality. He was very hesitant about it because of how much he struggled with immortality in the first place, but she said she wanted to be his partner in this for eternity. And basically, he gave it to her. And then they experienced this, life together. Well, that's weird because there's another section in the story that pretty clearly still indicates that Alara is mortal. There's a lack of clarity on whether or not Alara is actually still a person or if she's experiencing regular lifespan. There's even a part where it talks about them living through centuries. But the entire point of the last section of the story, right, is that Alara is living her own mortal life. I'll actually try to include the story, like the full manuscript, if you want to call it that, in the description of this video, or at least like the about section, so you can see it for yourself. But Alara is explicitly stated as mortal at the end of the story. And so that's one thing to think about with this. When you read it, it's like, there seems to be some inconsistencies. There also isn't much physical description. There is one section at the very beginning where we get the tiniest bit of physical description for Kale in like a very generic roundabout way. Basically, it's either prose or dialogue where Alara, I think, mentally comments that someone who looks so wise and aged would come up and like talk to her. So we can like assume Kale is old looking, but we don't know, right? Looking wise and aged, that could be something that a 50-year-old man can look like, right? That could be an 80-year-old man, right? We have no real idea. We have no conception of what either of these characters look like. There's a ton of visible description given to the landscape, which I think is really important, because whenever a writer is creating a scene, they really have to understand that scene setting first is what your reader is going to view whenever they read anything, and you have to establish that before going into a lot of the action. And so Kale's abode, you know, being in the forest with the river and her coming in and where they live and everything, I think that is well realized. I think the relationship with the characters is also well realized. It's just the physical description isn't really there, and it would be nice to have that. On one hand, I will say this though, this does contribute to the, I think, of the lofty kind of like removed from the character's experience of the narrative, and it makes it feel very folklore-y, right? To not have the physical description. The characters become almost idealistic, but they represent things and ideals more than they do actual people, right? And that it could have been like an actual intent done by the AI, I guess. But I'm also thinking that if they wanted to go for something different, to actually have these characters be characters, you put in some brief physical descriptions, because you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have physical description to your characters at the beginning that also works towards your thematic and tonal mission. So that's one of the things I also saw as well. Points of weakness that I would say for a story like this though, is the lack of character movement for Kale. And then after, I'll talk about what I see as a point of weakness as far as what seems to be the theme and the tone of the story as a whole. Kale basically begins the story wanting to die because he's lived so long. He finds Alara, and then there's an explicit section in the story where it's stated Kale learns to have an appreciation of life because he can pass down all the knowledge that he has to make Alara's life better, right? She comes to him being like, I want to basically not experience life anymore. I have been so hurt. I've experienced so much loss. I don't want to do this anymore. And by the end of the story, she has an appreciation for life because of Kale. And so we get to the midpoint of the story where Kale also has an appreciation for life. And then just randomly, after both of them have kind of like discovered the secret to immortality, Kale's like, no, I still want to die. So he leaves Alara to go on his mission. And I think, and I laugh at the idea of actually assigning an intent to an AI who made this, when again, this is like a conglomeration of multiple different stories that many people have, you know, made in ChatGPT. It's just smashing them together. But if I were to assign actual thematic detail to this, I guess it would be that even when the characters have separated, and the choice for them not to be together, at least made by Kale, the love between them and the kinship that they had developed lasted even beyond that. Because that's what Alara says, basically, at the end. Which I think is cool, right? However, I don't know if it's necessarily outweighed by the, I'm gonna say, negative theme, or possibly harmful theme, of a character still, I think, ending their positive journey by being like, no, I still want to die. I don't care how like good my life is. And it almost goes back on the thoughts of him finding a new purpose in life, insofar as being there for Alara and passing down his knowledge and experiences to make other people better. By the end of the story, Kale just ends the same way that he began. So he almost becomes dynamic by changing and then reverts to being stagnant, which I think is kind of weird. And then the worst part of the story is that I think it's really just anticlimactic, Kale leaves Alara, but then just like doesn't find death. It's not like he even is able to have a close to his mission. He just doesn't find it, right? The story just says like, oh, you know, he never found it. You know, he probably never will. But Alara loves him regardless, and you know, she'll always be there for him. The only like major edit that I would have that would fix the story, and it would be to have Kale make a sacrifice. I think if you were working with a situation, everything was the same basically up into the midpoint. You had Kale be alone, want to die. You have Alara come, kind of want to die too. They find value and worth in each other, and then they both say, oh, we want to live now. I think if you had some circumstance where Kale learned of either some personal calamity coming to Alara or some personal calamity coming to the world, where he then knew that if he sacrificed himself, right, if he went on a mission, if he confronted whatever this terrible thing was, you know, and let's just say the magic was drained from his body, that would be way more interesting. Because think about it. If you have a story where the entire starting point is like this character wants to die, and then he is presented that option, exactly what he wanted at the start, but in the middle, you make it so that the character actually wants to live, you create this really cool tension. So you'd introduce him wanting to die, he would find something to live for, something greater than himself, and then some calamity happens, which would demand his own life. And he says, no, I don't want to do that anymore, which is a complete reversal from, you know, his original starting position. And then Alara tells him, it does not matter if you die, we will be together forever because of our love. And I think having him then go off at the end of the story to confront whatever this calamity is, and then have Alara think about his presence being there, how they transcend eternity, I think is a much more interesting commentary on the idea of immortality than if he just was alive and gone, right? Because now he's literally ended. The immortal character is dead. And Alara, I guess in this case, would actually be immortal, and she would recognize, yeah, like, this is gonna suck for you. Him making the sacrifice willingly to save others instead of selfishly wishing that he didn't exist anymore, right? It almost like redefines and repurposes his starting point at the beginning. Because now he's like, I have found something that I want to live for, but now I have the opportunity to really help others. In the same way that Kale was, you know, helping Alara by passing down his knowledge, he has the ability to help others by basically ending his life, which is a transformation, and I think ultimately a redemption of his original kind of like dark desire to not live anymore. So if I was talking to a client, that's the edit I would give. And the reason I give that is because ultimately it's really easy to make. You don't have to hardly make any changes. All of the clients who work with me know that my motto is the smallest changes for the biggest results. And so that's kind of like my take on this story, the good, the bad, what I would change, everything along with it. And I hope that, you know, if you were interested in this kind of thing, if you want me to do more, just let me know. Because it was really fun, right? So, as always, it was a pleasure. Thank you for sticking around for what is probably going to be 20 minutes. And I hope you all have a great day.